You know things are bad for Disney and Snow White when the best spin the Hollywood trades can offer is, well, at least it opened higher than Catwoman and Joker Folie à Deux. That's grasping at straws, and we're about to see why. Let's dive into the humiliation of not just this Snow White, but Rachel Zegler, Disney, and the entire ideology which facilitated this movie happening in the first place. This video is sponsored by Surfshark. Going into the weekend, Hollywood projected that Disney's Snow White remake would open to 50-something million. It's important to stress that that is not what they thought it would open to when they greenlit the movie in the first place. That is not a figure they're happy with. No, that is merely what all these sales indicators suggested that the movie would open at. And relative to the money spent on not just making but retooling it, that isn't good enough. Alas, the downright negative reviews and word of mouth took hold, and it soon became clear that an opening weekend above 50 million was out of the question. That's when Deadline Hollywood, an industry trade which by default is rooting for both the movie and for Disney, attempted some damage control, writing, "Here's the good news when it comes to Disney's Snow White." At 45 million, the live-action take of the 1937 tune is opening higher than other controversial-laden movies such as Warner Bros. Catwoman and Joker Folie à Deux, and even Relativity's very expensive at the time 2012 version of Snow White Mirror Mirror. That's their spin then. That's the good news. That at the very least, Disney's super expensive gamble that needed to be a massive hit is outperforming all of these notorious flops, including Catwoman from 20 years ago. Well, we're about to get into the bad news, and in detail, but I can say right away that content like this Snow White is why the Disney brand identity is in the crapper, and why Disney Plus is failing as a streamer. Content like this is why people are unsubscribing and taking to the high seas. Though obviously, neither we at Midnight's Edge nor any of our sponsors condone anyone taking to the high seas. I mean, it's wrong for one thing, and just think of all of the spyware, malware, and other assorted tracking software you'd run the additional risk of being subjected to, even beyond your normal browsing. There's a fix though. To protect yourself, you need to protect your data, and a good way of doing that is through a VPN, such as the one delivered by this channel's sponsor, Surfshark, which you can visit at surfshark.com/midnight. A VPN, or Virtual Private Network, is a privacy protection tool which encrypts your online data and secures your personal information, even when you're on a free public Wi-Fi, which is a goldmine for anyone wanting your data. Surfshark masks your IP address so that your location, download history, and other data isn't linked to your personal ID, while their Clean Web feature blocks trackers, malware, and phishing attempts, enabling you to surf safely. Best of all, unlike some other VPN providers out there, Surfshark does not monitor, track, or store what you do online. There's no activity log. In addition to providing online safety, Surfshark also liberates your internet by unblocking blocked websites and enabling you to bypass geo-blocking restrictions by changing the country you access the internet from, which gives some great advantages when it comes to streaming. For instance, you can access 15 different Netflix libraries, all with a different selection of movies and TV series simply by changing your virtual location. And there are many to choose from, as Surfshark has over 3,200 servers in more than 100 countries around the world. It gets even better though. If you use our link, surfshark.com/midnight, that triggers an exclusive special offer of 4 extra months for free. So, secure your privacy with Surfshark. Just head on over to surfshark.com/midnight to order. Link is in the description. Surfshark also offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk in trying it out at surfshark.com/midnight. Thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. And with that, let's continue with the bad news for Snow White. And there are several facets to that, with plenty humiliation to go around. Disney is trying to pivot away from activism now, but only because their activism has been extremely detrimental to all of their brands and business. The bad news for Snow White is that it was conceptualized, developed, and filmed back when they were all in on changing the world through their programming, meaning there's a lot in Snow White the audience is going to have an adverse reaction to. Obviously not as much as before they retooled the movie, which caused it to get pushed back by a year and face upwards of $100 million in additional production costs beyond the frequently listed budget. But still, there is some activist remains in there, which Hollywood now knows functions as audience repellent. Despite Disney's valiant efforts at hiding this by way of generating an influencer-driven perception that, despite the negative impressions, the movie was filled with wonder and starring an absolutely mesmerizing, stunning and brave Rachel Zegler that you all need to see right away before you hear any other reviews. But that perception could not last. As soon as actual reviewers saw the movie, let alone actual audiences, the jig was up. The Emperor was exposed as having no clothes. Yeah, of course there are some people here and there who will like it, which is fine, we all have our guilty pleasures. But on the whole, the movie was savaged by audiences and by critics alike. And the latter of the two is very bad news for Disney. Let's see why. Whenever a movie, or even a comedy special from the likes of Dave Chappelle, remotely touched on culture war issues, the trend has been very clear for the better part of a decade now. There would be a huge disparity between the critic score and the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. If it was based, it would be loved by the audience and savaged by the critics. But if it was message-driven and pushed DEI and neo-Marxism, the opposite would be true, and in that case, accusations of review bombing would ensue and be labeled at the audience. Because if the audience score disagreed with the critic score, then surely there must be something wrong with the audience score. A great example here is Disney's The Little Mermaid remake, a movie which flopped everywhere but the US, and which was praised by the critics, but where the audience were far less generous in their verdict, especially the international audience. Accusations of review bombing were thus hurled at audiences worldwide, when in reality it was the critic score that seemed inflated, with many a review which read as negative were labeled as positive. It was almost as if some critics were trying to protect Disney and the movie. For all the good that did, the audience still stayed away in droves and the movie flopped. Well, fast forward to today and to Snow White, and the critics are for the most part done with that shtick, because in Disney's hour of greatest need, the critics turned on both them and Snow White, sending it deeper and deeper into solidly rotten territory. Make no mistake about it, the audience were always going to savage the movie. The big news here is that the critics savaged it as well, because this is just the kind of movie that not too long ago would have seen a huge difference between the critic score and the audience score. With the critics walking in lockstep with the will of Disney, celebrating just how important and progressive the movie was, and how problematic anyone opposing it for any reason would be. But now, the culture has shifted, and in that shift, Disney has lost the power and influence they used to have only a short while ago. The audience has spoken, not just at the box office, but at the ballot box, where they voted firmly against everything Disney was pushing, sending the very clear message that no, the activists were in fact on the wrong side of history. That's where Disney is now, and everyone knows it, on the wrong side of history. That's very bad news for Disney, because not only are they stuck with an overpriced movie which is pushing an ideology everyone has since rejected. There is hardly anyone left but select influencers to run cover for them, leaving them with eggs on their face, or Rotten Tomatoes as it were, and Disney aren't the only ones. An argument can be made that Rachel Zegler was never more than incidental stunt casting, as it was Disney's call to subvert a European folktale, and if they hadn't gone with Zegler, they'd have gone with someone else of equally, not quite European descent. So Disney has to accept responsibility for both the subversive direction of the movie, as well as Rachel Zegler being the face of it. And her being an activist is no doubt why she was chosen, because again, Disney was all about changing the world when the movie was being developed. Still, Zegler is nonetheless the face of a movie that is now on the wrong side of culture, and she came out strong against the original animated classic, acting in a way she probably thought everyone would agree with and think endearing.
I know that you've told me before that your version of Snow White is different, and it's more of a 2022 version of Snow White. What did you mean by that?
I mean, you know, the original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird.
In reality though, everyone just thought her insufferable, and the movie was never able to overcome those initial words of hers. Now granted, she was merely parroting talking points given to her by her equally activist Disney handlers, but still, that's the point where the movie lost a large swath of the built-in audience, let alone all the content creators covering Disney. Doubling down, Zegler responded by letting anyone who voted differently from her know that their custom was not welcome. So I would imagine that Zegler must be happy with the box office numbers, because clearly they listened. Still, this entire thing, coupled with the fact that everything else she has headlined has bombed, means the end of her career as the face of blockbusters for the foreseeable future. Her recent career shift to the West End is not a promotion, let's say. That's her reps trying to save her career by shifting it. Of course, there is someone else who still has a career, but whose rep needs saving following Snow White. Dwarves used to be big in Hollywood, but there has been a shortfall in opportunities for dwarf actors in recent decades. And the opportunities that there has been have more often than not been occupied by one Peter Dinklage. He used to be respected in the dwarf community, which is a small one I might add, but that was before he implied that Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was somehow problematic, at which point Disney freaked out and decided to go with dirty hippies and CGI monstrosities, thinking that denying dwarf actors employment opportunities was virtuous. This did not elevate Peter Dinklage's standing in the community. Luckily, he has the Toxic Avenger remake to fall back on, though he actually barely showed up for that. You see, he appears pre-transformation and does the voice throughout, but it's actually a woman behind the mask. Either way, Disney should consider stop short-changing dwarf actors going forward, and while they're at it, reassess some other strategies as well. Disney has been making live-action remakes of their animated movies for more than a decade now, and that's yielded them several major hits, some of which have even crossed the billion-dollar mark. But that hasn't happened for many years now. On the contrary, in recent history, their live-action remakes have been nothing but one disaster after the other, and Snow White may end up being the biggest flop of them all. The one saving grace here is the upcoming Lilo and Stitch remake, which could be one of the biggest movies of the year, and certainly the one that drives the most merch sales. But, like last year's Deadpool and Wolverine, that too is a fluke. Snow White is indicative of the norm. Disney may need to reassess their entire strategy here. Maybe they should go back to making original movies based on folk tales, because that worked for them before. In fact, it built the entire company. And there's a literal untapped treasure trove to pick and choose from. But who knows what the powers that be at Disney will decide. They will have to do something though, because what they have been doing isn't working. The real good news for Disney, to the extent of which you can call it that, is that the Daily Wire is having some staffing issues of their own, which means that their version of Snow White starring Brett Cooper will likely never be released. Their version of the story promised to be more accurate to the original folk tale, and it would have been very embarrassing to Disney if audiences preferred the Daily Wire's shoestring budget Snow White to Disney's mega budget Snow White. So if nothing else, they dodged a bullet there. Unfortunately for Disney though, more and more are discovering that there is another subversive Snow White out there, which is shorter and has a more cohesive story, and it's available for free on YouTube, namely Rammstein's Snow White, from their 2001 music video Sonne, a video which has exploded in views in the latter days, and for good reason. Granted, that music video was made for a different audience than the movie was, but in the end, it does play to a bigger audience. After nothing but non-stop controversy and ridicule since the moment Rachel Zegler decried the original as weird, Disney's Snow White is finally out. Everyone in Disney were no doubt dreading the day it would be released. But now that it's out, I'm sure they're relieved and anxious to be done with it and move on from it forever, because it has done nothing but damage to the Disney brand. There is irony in that, as Snow White took Disney to the next level back in the day. Today, the remake brought them one step closer to the end. The end is still a far way off though, and chances are Disney will move on from this, and there are more flops to come. These box office numbers, however, do further confirm that they still have to pivot and away from everything represented by this Snow White. Question remains though, will they learn the right lessons from this? Can they get out of their current rut with the same mindset that brought them into it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And before you go, remember to secure your privacy with Surfshark VPN. Use our link surfshark.com/midnight to get an exclusive special offer of 4 extra months for free. Surfshark also offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk in trying it out at surfshark.com/midnight. Link is in the description.